This video, number 5.0, discusses the setup.dat file. And briefly, all CAMCAD posts are shipped with a setup.dat file. And we're going to cover the syntax rules. We're going to cover related documentation for those of you who really want to get into depth about the setup file. We're going to give you a summary of macro names and what they do. We'll talk about internal macro names and how to find out what was used in a given custom post. And then we'll review a typical setup.dat file. Briefly, the setup.dat file is just an extension of a custom post that is intended to allow, and it's shipped as in source format, to allow user runtime options to be set without disturbing the actual custom post code and recompiling the post, or to allow user control of startup, tool change, and shutdown. On mill turn posts that have main and subspindle setups, the file contains syntax to define the initial location of the part, plus commands to switch from main to sub and from sub to main and so forth. So basically the setup.dat file is using normal fill language, and the custom post simply makes calls to macro definitions in the setup file rather than internally in the post itself. So summarized here are some syntax rules for the fill language, basically. And that is live data must reside between columns 1 to 72. And anything past 72 is ignored. A double dollar is a comment. A single dollar outside of quote marks is a line continuation for long lines that have to go past line 72. A dollar sign within quote marks issues an end to block in the output NC file. Command words are 6 characters max. User variables begin with an @ symbol. Command words and variables are not case sensitive. Single digit variables A through Z or uppercase A through Z are reserved. Should not be used. You'll get very unpredictable results if you do. We don't want to see things like this or like this in the setup file. Again, macro definitions, 6 characters or max. CAMCAD supplied macros begin with an underscore symbol. CAMCAD supplied variables begin with an @ symbol. Strings of text in insert statements must be enclosed with single quote marks. In other words, this is a string of text. So insert statements must end with a $ within quotes, as shown here. Here's 2 examples and 2 situations. Here's a string of text, G00Z as a string, and then a comma, which says there's another unit of information, and the user variable called rplane. And then a comma says there's another unit of information, another string of text here. And here is another one, another example where this is a complete string. And again, it ends in a $, doesn't it? There are actually 3 locations on a SurfCam system for additional information. One is within SurfCam from the main menu, clicking on Help, Contents, Post Processors. In other words, Help, Contents, and then Post Processors. There's Post Solutions, discussion of the SurfCam post interface, the config file, library, SPost base, and so forth and so on, discussion of the CL file. The other file that's critical is in the SurfCam root folder under apps SPost docs, and that's the SPost fill programming language. This contains detailed descriptions of all syntax and examples and soup to nuts on the fill language. The third is in the SurfCam root help folder. There's an CPost M quick reference file. That's an MHT, which is a single HTML file with multiple sheets from a spreadsheet. That is a condensed reference for an experienced programmer, and you'll find information in that. So before we proceed, let's review some of the syntax and look by looking at an example of a setup file. You remember columns 1 through 72. And that's all we try and put that there as kind of a reminder that you don't want to go past column 72. A double dollar means that the line is a comment. So these 3 lines are just commentary, don't mean anything. They're not processed by the runtime system. The first command in, or the first live command in here is the beginning of a macro definition called setup. Setup equals a macro, and the macro always ends with a terminate the macro statement, kind of like a subroutine and end of sub on your CNC controller. Now, all these commands are preceded by a double dollar, so they're basically commentary. And what we do is we set the runtime option defaults, show you what the defaults are, and then you can remove the double dollar sign to activate one of these variables. So, for example, the rapid plane on this machine is set up to 8 inches. If you wanted something different, then you'd set it to 12 maybe or something like that. Anyway, further down in the setup file, it also contains what we call user startup blocks. So after the post processor initializes, these will be the initial blocks that are put out, and the user is in control here. So that's the setup macro itself. The home macro is similar in nature. It is called prior to a tool change, and it ends in a termac. So there's the logic here on this particular machine. Is the hide behind there, kind of squirrely. And then the shutdown blocks, similarly, these are called at the end of the program. This is the very end of the subroutine, or the end of the program. This particular machine calls another internal macro to push out all the syntax to activate the Bloom laser device. And again, setup, home, and footer are found in pretty much every custom post. In addition, you might see in a mill turn post, you'll see M to S for main to sub part transfer, and S to M for sub to main part transfer. Now, internal macro names, you cannot repeat a macro, or you can't overwrite a macro name once it's been defined. And these names will vary from custom post to custom post. So it's important that you know where to find them if indeed you need to define an additional macro in the setup file, which you're free to do. So what we'll do is we'll look at the PDF that's shipped with the custom post. And the PDF always has a password of CAMCAD, all caps, no quote marks. So in the front end of a post is the identity of the post, the customer it's for, and all the machine, a picture of the machine, revision history, and so forth and so on. But normally near the top is a list of all the events that are processed by a given custom post. And it's these macro names right here that may not be repeated in the setup.dat file because they're predefined here. So arc, R-plane, cutter, coolant, and so forth. Again, 6 characters max, and the first character is always an underscore on any of the macros that are in a CAMCAD post. Not expecting you to fully understand everything here, but basically just some reminders on some rules. The $sign must be on an insert command. It must be the last character within quotes in order to force out an end of block. Because if that's not present, then the MO5 will be padded out to 60 characters or so and start over here on the next line. We don't want to do that. And and again, here's a string of text, a variable, and then another string of text that ends in a $sign.